NFL deadline day is over. It is complete. We've seen all the moves happen with teams acquiring pieces to make their final run in the second half of the season and potentially into playoffs. We'll see what happens with each of those teams and the players on these teams. And we'll also talk about the selling teams, what they gained from getting rid of a few players, and what it means for the outlook of the NFL season. This deadline wasn't quite as crazy as last year. I think there was 11 moves in the last 24 hours last season, just the 6 this year, but still some interesting moves to be had. And without further ado, let's just get into it. So as far as the biggest name move goes, it has to be Chase Young from the Commanders, and we'll get to Montez Sweat as well, because the Commanders basically are rebuilding. It's a whole new era, new owner. They're moving forward without their former number 2 pick, Chase Young, and another former first rounder, Montez Sweat. But firstly on Chase Young, the 49ers have acquired him for just a 3rd round pick. And on face value, you see that a former number 2 overall getting dealt for a 3rd round, and it's quite unbelievable. But when you look into it, in terms of Chase Young, while yes, superstar sort of player, caliber player, has had his injury woes, and I think that has made teams wary of him, particularly the Commanders. They didn't pick up his 5th-year option, and then now obviously dealt him. But with the 49ers, they're a team in win-now mode. They've got superstars everywhere. Chase Young is going to be lining up on the other side of Nick Bosa, former college teammate. So it's just an unbelievable team that they've built here in San Francisco. And to get someone like Chase Young's caliber, when he's fit and healthy, one of the best young edge rushers going around, because his rookie season was unbelievable, 12.5 sacks. That ACL injury came along in the next season, so he's missed a lot of time in the last couple of years, but started this season very strong, 5 sacks and a number of QB pressures, I believe in the top 5, along with Nick Bosa in terms of QB pressures. So I think that's a brilliant get for San Francisco. Getting a 3rd round pick back in terms of Washington, decent enough. You probably were going to struggle to get much more. I mean, if you'd be hoping to get maybe a 2nd, but obviously that didn't happen. But you did get a 2nd for Montez Sweat, the other edge rusher of the Washington Commanders, formerly now a Chicago Bear. And Montez Sweat is probably the one on the Commanders that just doesn't get talked about enough. And people might look at that 2nd round pick being given to the Commanders for Sweat and think, is that too much? But I think he's a very, very good player, an underrated one, because he was on the same team as Chase Young, but also Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen. That interior defense, that whole defensive line was, it should have been phenomenal. Didn't quite live up to expectation on a consistent basis, but Montez Sweat, in his own right, is a great edge rusher, and I think a great piece for this Chicago Bears team that is obviously building something for the future. The next move I'm going to look at is Rasul Douglas has moved to the Bills from Green Bay. I think this is a very interesting one, and I think it's a great get for the Bills, considering the sort of hole that they're in terms of their defensive backroom. The big one, Tre'Davious White, obviously out for the season as of a couple of weeks ago. He's their main cornerback. And then on the other hand, you've got someone like Kaiir Elam, a former 1st round pick, cornerback who's been struggling. So they really needed some reinforcement in that room to shore up the defense, because it had been not quite as what it was at the start of this season, which was an elite defense. So the Bills ended up giving up a 3rd round pick, but also acquiring a 5th round. So all in all, I think the Bills really won this trade. And then on the flip side, we've got to talk about the Packers. They're another team that's really, this season, has not gone to plan whatsoever. Jordan Love has not looked great. And the Packers as a whole are kind of in rebuild mode, I think, which is kind of weird to say given Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre, the last couple decades. It's a different era now in the Green Bay area. The next move is quite an intriguing one, because it is Josh Dobbs, formerly of the Cardinals, going to Minnesota. Kirk Cousins, of course, if you hadn't seen the news, he's done his Achilles, he's out for the season. Genuinely gutted for him and for Minnesota, because Kirk Cousins, having watched that quarterback documentary, seems like an unbelievably solid bloke in terms of just the effort and the work that he puts into his own body and mind. It's really sad to see that sort of injury happen to anyone, but especially someone like Kirk Cousins. But obviously, they've made the decision to bring in someone like Josh Dobbs, who is a very competent quarterback. And I'm a supporter of the Cardinals, so I've watched him for the last few weeks and I've enjoyed him. He's been entertaining, but at the same time, he has his limitations. Even though he does sort of have his limitations and he's had his boneheaded sort of mistakes and avoidable mistakes in the last few weeks, which is probably why he was already going to be benched anyway. Clayton Toon, or if Kyler Murray was coming back this week, was going to play. So he was getting benched regardless, I think, of whether he was getting moved. But obviously in Minnesota, they're 4-4, so their season is well and truly alive. The playoff picture for them is one of those wild card spots, and bringing in someone like Dobbs to just, if he can at least make the offense capable of scoring points, maybe not as regularly as in the air as someone like Kirk Cousins, but the thing that Josh Dobbs brings that Cousins does not have is his ability to run, and that was seen on many occasions for the Cardinals in the last few weeks, because out of anyone in the NFL, he is one of the top players to produce 20-yard plus runs. So he's a rusher, but he can also be serviceable through the air, just hoping he can limit some mistakes in terms of the Vikings. And just quickly on the Cardinals, they only got a 6th-round pick out of this, giving away also a 7th-rounder, so it doesn't really mean much. Their sort of concern is elsewhere in terms of the QB situation and their higher draft picks being the potential first overall. The next deal involved the Detroit Lions, who are having a phenomenal season, and they're beefing up their wide receiving core with Donovan Peoples-Jones, a former Browns player. Didn't really make much of an impact in his time in Cleveland, but obviously it's just a nice piece to have, given that Marvin Jones has sort of been away from the team due to personal reasons, so just adding another name to that wide receiving core is just a good solid piece for a team that is competing heavily in the NFC. And then the final deal to occur on deadline day involved the Jaguars and the Minnesota Vikings again. The Jaguars acquiring interior offensive lineman Ezra Cleveland, so a guard. Adding that to the Jaguars offensive line, I think, was very necessary. It's one of their few areas that they really needed to bolster, I think, and just giving more protection to Trevor Lawrence in the pocket, I think is perfect, because obviously Trevor Lawrence and the Jags have so many weapons on the offense. He's throwing to the likes of Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Evan Engram, and Travis Etienne. He's having a phenomenal season, Travis Etienne, both running the ball and out of the backfield catching it. So he's got plenty of options, and just bolstering that offensive line and helping to protect your number one asset in Trevor Lawrence is perfect for the Jags, especially considering they'll be going on a playoff run. You'd imagine winning that division. And the Vikings received a 6th-round pick in return, so not much to talk about there. But that is it. That is all the deadline day deals done. That's a mouthful and a half, but let me know what you thought about each deal, or one in particular. Do you think a certain team maybe fleeced another? And what's the most exciting deal that happened for you? Was it your team, or was it just a fun one to watch from a neutral perspective? And also let me know about a potential deal that maybe didn't go through. Someone like Derrick Henry, that could have been a very, very fun one. It didn't end up happening because the Titans are sort of maybe hanging around with Will Levis's performance in his debut. So that would have been obviously a very cool one to see, but didn't end up happening. Let me know what player you would have liked to see on the move going to a competing team this season. And if you did enjoy this video, let me know in the comments. Give us a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.